The story of Moses, told in the biblical books of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, is one of the most significant stories in the Bible. Moses is the prophet chosen by God to free the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt and lead them to the Promised Land, laying the foundation for a new nation founded on faith and divine laws. Moses is born at a time of great oppression for the Hebrews, who are slaves in Egypt under the rule of a pharaoh who is fearful of their growing numbers. The pharaoh orders that all newborn Hebrew males be killed to prevent a rebellion. In order to protect her son, Moses' mother places the baby in a basket and lets him float down the Nile. Moses is miraculously discovered by the pharaoh's daughter, who decides to adopt him, and he grows up in the Egyptian royal court, receiving the education of a prince. However, Moses never loses his connection with his people. One day, seeing an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew slave, he intervenes and kills the Egyptian. Aware that this act could lead to his death, he flees to a foreign land and finds refuge in Midian, where he becomes a shepherd. There, Moses marries and begins a new life. One day, while guiding his flock to Mount Horeb, also called Mount Sinai, Moses has an extraordinary encounter that will transform his life. He sees a bush on fire, but what strikes him is that the bush does not burn despite the flames. Intrigued, Moses approaches to better observe this supernatural phenomenon. It is at that moment that God calls him by his name, Moses, Moses. Surprised, Moses answers, "Here I am." God orders him not to come any closer and to remove his sandals, because the place where he is holy. Through this encounter, God reveals to Moses his identity. "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Seized with fear and reverence, Moses covers his face, unable to bear to look directly at God. It is at this moment that God entrusts him with a mission of the highest importance by saying, "I have seen the suffering of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard the cries that their oppressors make them utter. For I know their pains. I have come down to deliver them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from this land flowing with milk and honey, in the places where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Revans, and the Jebusites live, to return to Egypt to free his people, the Hebrews, from slavery." Moses, although he is faced with the divine manifestation, is not immediately ready to accept this mission. He expresses deep doubts about his ability to fulfill this task. He asks himself, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Faced with this revelation, Moses expresses his doubts about his ability to accomplish this task. In response, God performs several miracles to strengthen Moses' faith. First, he turns Moses' staff into a snake, then turns it back into a staff. Then God shows Moses another miracle. The Lord said to him again, "Put your hand into your bosom." He put his hand into his bosom and then took it out. And behold, his hand was covered with leprosy, white as snow. The Lord said to him again, "Put your hand into your bosom." He put his hand into his bosom and then took it out. And behold, it was like his flesh. If they do not believe you and do not listen to the voice of the first sign, they will believe the voice of the second sign. If they do not believe even these two signs and do not listen to your voice, then you will take water from the river and pour it on the earth, and the water that you take from the river will become blood on the earth. Finally, to reassure Moses of his ability to communicate, God promises him that he will put the words in his mouth and send his brother Aaron as his spokesman. After receiving the divine order to return to Egypt, Moses, accompanied by his brother Aaron, goes before the Pharaoh to convey God's message to him. They ask him to free the Hebrews, claiming that God demands their departure to have them worshipped in the desert. However, the Pharaoh, proud and firmly attached to his power, stubbornly refuses this request, even mocking the authority of Moses and Aaron. Faced with this refusal, God announces that powerful miracles will be performed to show his strength and force the Pharaoh to give in. Then we witness the so-called plagues of Egypt. The 10 plagues of Egypt, sent by God to free the Hebrews, begin with the Nile turning into blood, followed by an invasion of frogs, lice, and flies, which spare the land of Goshen. A deadly disease strikes the livestock, and painful sores appear on the Egyptians. A devastating hailstorm and a plague of locusts ravage the fields, while a thick darkness settles over Egypt for 3 days. Finally, the last plague, the death of the Egyptian firstborn, prompts God to command the Hebrews to mark their doors with the blood of a lamb, an act that will become the basis of the Passover. After this last plague, the Pharaoh finally relents, and Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt in what is known as the Exodus. After leaving Egypt in the Exodus, the Hebrews, led by Moses, began a long journey through the desert toward the Promised Land. Their first test came at the Red Sea, where God performed a miracle by parting the waters, allowing the Hebrews to cross on dry land while the pursuing Egyptian army was drowned. In the desert, the people faced many hardships, such as thirst and hunger. God provided for them by bringing water from a rock and by sending them manna, a heavenly food, as well as quails to eat. Despite his miracles, the Hebrews often complained and regretted their life in Egypt, prompting Moses to intercede with God repeatedly for patience and forgiveness. At Mount Sinai, God established a covenant with the Israelites and gave them the 10 Commandments, engraved on tablets of stone, as well as other laws to guide them in their religious and social lives. While Moses is on the mountain to receive these laws, the impatient Hebrews make a golden calf and worship it, provoking God's anger. Moses implores God's mercy, and although God forgives, he imposes sanctions on those who have sinned. The journey in the desert is also marked by rebellions against Moses and God, such as the episode where the spies sent to Canaan return with frightening reports, inciting the people to doubt and revolt. As a result, God decides that this generation of Hebrews will wander in the desert for 40 years, until only their more faithful descendants are allowed to enter the Promised Land, after the 40 years of wandering of the Hebrews in the desert. Having arrived at the gates of the Promised Land, Moses will not be able to enter it because of his disobedience to God during the episode of the water of Meribah, where, instead of speaking to the rock as God had ordered, he strikes the rock to make water flow out. Because of this, God announces to him that he will see the Promised Land, but will not tread on it. Before dying, Moses reaffirms God's laws and commandments to the people in a series of speeches found in the book of Deuteronomy. He blesses the different tribes of Israel and designates Joshua, his faithful assistant, as his successor. Joshua Moses then climbs Mount Nebo, from where he can see the Promised Land, the land of Canaan, which he will not be able to cross. It is there that Moses dies, at the age of 120. The text says that his strength was not diminished and his eyes were not weakened, but that God himself buried him, and no one knows where his tomb is. The story of Moses, centered on his relationship with God, teaches us several essential lessons for today. It shows that God chooses leaders not for their strength, but for their faith and humility. Moses, despite his doubts, followed the divine call, proving that trust in God allows us to overcome the greatest trials. Through miracles and God's constant accompaniment, we learn that faith can guide and protect in the most difficult times. Finally, the story reminds us of the importance of faithfulness to God and His commandments, as well as the transmission of this faith to future generations to ensure a just and moral future. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe, like, and share this video if it inspired you.